Hello and welcome to the Sports Detective Show on YouTube. My name is James Williams, and today we are going to talk about the Washington Huskies football team biggest what if in program history. I saw this tweet the other day. I kind of wanted to talk about it because it involves the school I went to. It also involves Washington, and I feel like I can give you a lot more context and details of what actually happened here than this tweet actually describes. Not that the tweet's like inaccurate or anything, but I think I could kind of like just give you a little bit more context, a little bit more detail this story. So you can see here, I also zoomed in a little bit here to try and so I'm going to be scrolling during this to try and give you guys a little bit of a better image here, because I think sometimes with my software here you can't necessarily read all the stuff, and this is like a semi big tweet here, so you can kind of see the picture, tagline here: crazy but true, Washington wanted Matt Campbell. um, so for people that don't know, I went to Iowa State. I've been going to Iowa State games since I was 10 years old. And, Matt Campbell's the best thing that ever happened to our program since I've been alive. So I also been doing this podcast now for over 3+ years. Part of me doing that podcast before we start putting stuff like this on YouTube, it was a lot of me interviewing people that cover college football. I did over 50, have done and counting over 50+ interviews with people. And I've interviewed someone from, I'd say, 90% of people that report and cover on Power 5 football teams. So actually right after Washington hired DeBoer, I interviewed somebody. So I'm going to kind of talk about that interaction I had with this person. He's a good guy. I've interviewed him a few times. We're going to kind of read through this tweet here, and I'll kind of fill in details as we go along here. So crazy but true. Without Iowa State, the Washington Huskies wouldn't be in the national championship right now. In 2021, Washington went 4-8. They promptly fired their head coach and began a coaching search. A little bit more detail there. So Washington, I believe it was either 2019 or 2020, Chris Peterson resigns from Washington, and the heir to the throne is this defensive coordinator. His name was Jimmy Lake. And the Jimmy Lake era at Washington went terrible because I think he had the COVID year. I believe that might have been his first year. And then the next year, there was a situation halfway through the season where he had an altercation, a physical altercation with a player on the sidelines. And then I think he was actually even fired mid-season. So just to give you a little bit of a context there, this was rock bottom for Washington, or maybe not their biggest rock bottom that they've ever had, but probably the biggest one they had in about 10 or 12 years. So we'll continue here. Washington quickly honed in on their number one target, Iowa State head coach Matt Campbell. He took the Cyclones to a top 10 ranking a season prior, so it was thought that he could do even better at a school like Washington. The Huskies reportedly offered to raise his salary from $4 million a year to $7 million a year, but ultimately Iowa State countered their offers and retained Campbell. So a little bit of more context to that. One, why did Washington want Matt Campbell? Washington wanted Matt Campbell because there was they thought they could get him because there was a little bit of a connection. I believe this was the connection, if I was told right. So Washington's longtime head coach from the 70s, all throughout the 80s and the early 90s, his name was Don James. Excuse me. Well, Don James and Matt Campbell are from the same hometown, I believe. And it was believed that Matt Campbell looked up to Don James, kind of thought of him as an icon, kind of modeled a lot of his coaching philosophy and strategies after Don James. So Washington kind of thought hey, we have this guy here who's really talented head coach, and he's got a little bit of a connection here. So that's basically the reason why they targeted him. A few things here. If my memory is correct, it wasn't $7 million a year. I believe it was actually 8. That's kind of what my memory was. That was what my memory was, but I could be wrong. We'll continue here. This forced. Also another tidbit here before I move on to the next thing. I remember I made the guy I interviewed from Washington. I remember when we talked about this because I told him, I was like, hey, I was 0% worried that Matt Campbell was going to leave for Washington. I was 0% worried. I didn't think that for a second. And he was like, what, really? And I was like, yeah, the only schools that Iowa State fans know that Matt Campbell, that they'd be worried if they became open that Matt Campbell would leave for would be Notre Dame and Ohio State. That's what it's been the entire time. Now, again, things change over time. I could look like a fool if, like, in 2 years, Matt Campbell leaves for, like, Tennessee or something. I don't know. Um, but basically, those are the only two schools that we ever thought that he would leave for would be Notre Dame and Ohio State. We are never worried about Washington. We'll continue here. This forced Washington to go with their second option, a little known coach from South Dakota called Kalen DeBoer. Now, I honestly am not sure if he was their second option. I really am not sure. He might have been. They might have said, "All right." Matt Campbell said, "No, we'll go to Kalen DeBoer," because as you'll read here, DeBoer was the head coach of Fresno State for 2 seasons, acknowledged as an offensive guru. There were many people questioning this hire. Um, yeah, because he was kind of unproven. He'd been, an assistant coach for a long time. Was at Fresno State for a few years. Did pretty well at Fresno State, by the way. Those 2 years were pretty good. But it was kind of like, all right, well, this is a little bit of a risk here because he's not necessarily a guy that's been a head coach for a while. We don't know what to make of this here. And as we'll kind of like read here and finish this, but in just 2 seasons, DeBoer has proved the Huskies from 4-8 to 11-2 and now 14-0 with a chance at winning it all. Lightning emoji. Without the Cyclones fighting to keep Campbell, the Huskies wouldn't be here right now. I mean, that is a little bit of a shot at Matt Campbell, where it's like, hey, Matt Campbell's the head coach. he he wouldn't get him here. Now, I agree that it's a little bit of a shot for him, but I also agree that Matt Campbell probably wouldn't have this team in the national championship, and that's not a slight to Matt Campbell. That's a acknowledgement to how great DeBoer has been. Washington doesn't make mistakes. Their offense is electric. They have talented receivers on the outside. Um, Basically DeBoer was an OC at Indiana for 2019, where if you know anything about Michael Penix Jr., that's where Michael Penix started his college career was at Indiana. So they had that little bit of a connection there. And if you don't hire DeBoer, you don't get Michael Penix probably. And who knows what Michael Penix would be doing? Would he be in the national championship game? Would he be in the NFL right now? Would he be like, I don't know where he'd be. But DeBoer's connection to Penix is the reason that he's there. And Penix looks like Penix is probably going to get drafted in the first round. If he has an impressive national championship game, they don't even have to win. But if he has an impressive national championship game, this dude has raised his draft stock tremendously. And kind of like, I guess, like my big picture point of this is somebody that, again, has done over 50 interviews with people that cover teams, that follows a lot of different college football news, that follows the coaching hire cycles for a while and gets, overworked by them, gets confused by them, gets frustrated by them, is sometimes when you are trying to hire a head coach, the splashy name isn't always the best name. When you even too, this is not necessarily related to this, but like we're going to have it happen next year probably when Florida's going to fire Billy Napier. It's going to happen at some point, but like they're going to fire him and they're going to have no idea who they're going to hire. And that happened the last time when they hired Billy Napier. They're like, oh, we'll get rid of Dan Mullen. We'll get somebody better. Well, you hired Billy Napier and you might have downgraded from that. So, so kind of, I guess the moral of the story here is even if you don't get your first option, doesn't mean you made the wrong hire. If you hire someone that's smart, puts in the work, even has the connections here like DeBoer did with Penix, just put them in a position, give them the opportunity to succeed, and you might be surprised by the outcome. Well, that's where you have it. Hopefully, if you didn't know a few details of this story, hopefully that kind of illuminated some for you here. So thank you very much for watching. My name is James Williams. If you enjoyed this here today, I'd very much appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button, if you hit that like button, if you like this video, and feel free to explore the rest of the Sports Detective podcast channel on YouTube. We try to post videos relatively often. They're kind of short, 10-minute little things like this where we talk about interesting sports stories. I'll talk about stuff from the NBA, college football, college basketball, NFL, you name it. We talk about it. So just talk about stories that interest me. Again, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next time.